A reading from the book of Genesis. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the hatch he had made in the ark, and he sent out a raven to see if the waters had lessened on the earth. It flew back and forth until the waters dried off from the earth. Then he sent out a dove to see if the waters had lessened on the earth. But the dove could find no place to alight and perch, and it returned to him in the ark, for there was water all over the earth. Putting out his hand, he caught the dove and drew it back to him inside the ark. He waited 7 days more and again sent the dove out from the ark. In the evening, the dove came back to him, and in its bill there was a plucked off olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had lessened on the earth. He waited still another 7 days, and then released the dove once more, and this time it did not come back. In the 601st year of Noah's life, in the first month, on the first day of the month, the water began to dry up on the earth. Noah then removed the covering of the ark, and saw that the surface of the ground was drying up. Noah built an altar to the Lord, and choosing from every clean animal and every clean bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. When the Lord smelled the sweet odor, he said to himself, "Never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the desires of man's heart are evil from the start. Nor will I ever again strike down all living beings as I have done. As long as the earth lasts, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." Verbum Domini. To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise.
To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise.
How shall I make a return to the Lord for all the good he has done for me? The cup of salvation I will take up, and I will call upon the name of the Lord.
To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise.
My vows to the Lord I will pay in the presence of all his people. Precious in the eyes of the Lord is the death of his faithful ones.
To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise.
My vows to the Lord I will pay in the presence of all his people, in the courts of the house of the Lord, in your midst, O Jerusalem.
To you, Lord, I will offer a sacrifice of praise.
Jesus Christ, enlighten the eyes of our hearts, that we may know the hope that belongs to his call. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia,
Dominus vobiscum,
et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Marcum.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
When Jesus and his disciples arrived at Bethsaida, people brought to him a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Putting spittle on his eyes, he laid his hands on the man and said, "Do you see anything?" Looking up, the man replied, "I see people looking like trees and walking." Then he laid hands on the man's eyes a second time, and he saw clearly. His sight was restored, and he could see everything distinctly. Then he sent him home and said, "Do not even go into the village." Verbum Domini.
Laus tibi Christe.
There's a few interesting facts to consider in today's gospel. First of all, that the location is in Bethsaida. Second is the group that brought the blind man to Jesus. And third is the blind man himself. So Bethsaida, the group bringing the blind man to Jesus, and then the blind man himself. Nothing is by chance when the Lord is involved. Bethsaida appears to be a place of much fidelity and sin. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus rebukes them, saying, "Woe to thee, Bethsaida, for it is the mighty works which were done if you had been done in Tyre and Sidon. They would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." Therefore, Jesus, it says, the gospel says, took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Outside that village that had been pummeled by sin. And this, we can say, this shows the pastoral care, that pastoral touch of Jesus. Him leading the man outside the village. And there is no indication that Jesus took the whole group outside the village in the gospel, but only the blind man. Perhaps the Lord saw the group's lack of faith, and he wanted to work specifically with this man on his personal need. Interestingly, Jesus asked the question to the blind man after putting spittle on his eyes and then again laying his hands, that personal touch, laying his hands on this man's eyes. He says, "Do you see anything?" And this is the first time in any miracle account in the Gospels that Jesus asks a question regarding a healing. In most, if not all accounts, there was an instantaneous healing. Not just from a physical infirmity, but again from a spiritual infirmity, a deep down spiritual infirmity of the soul. The question from the Lord meant that he knew the blind man's faith was lacking. Sure, the group's faith may have been lacking, but the blind man, the man that he had right in front of him, the man that he was dealing with on a personal level, his faith was lacking. And we can see from the gospel that the healing was not altogether complete. There was still a vision problem, if you will. And we can see that in our own lives, in our own life of faith. Just imagine for a moment not being able to see. Not being able to see, even coming into a dark room, there's a vision problem. You don't know where things are. You're kind of fumbling around. But just imagine not being able to see from birth. And then Jesus, the God-man, coming and laying his hands on this man's eyes and begging faith from this man. There are many people in the world, ourselves included, that suffer from spiritual blindness. Not just physical blindness, but spiritual blindness from really reality itself. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI used to say that the greatest things in this world and in the world to come are those things that which we cannot see. So often we say, and we hear people say, if only I can see, then I'll believe. Well, really? The apostles saw Jesus. They saw his mighty works. They saw his mighty deeds. But some chose to turn away and not believe. Many things, even in nature, we can't see. For instance, you can't see the wind blowing on a tree, but you can see the wind's effects, can't you? You can see that the wind moves the tree and the leaves, and you can see its effects, but you can't see the wind itself. You can't see what's going on inside the human body, how the blood is going around the different veins and the arteries. You can't see what's going on in the human mind. You can't see that somebody's thinking. So many of the things on a natural level, some of the greatest mysteries on a natural level, we can't see, but we know that something is happening. People may be able to see naturally, but be totally blind to spiritual reality. And Jesus often referred to the Pharisees as being blind. Sure, they might be able to see, sure, they may know all the law, the many prescriptions of the law that they added, the many and different interpretations of the law. But do they really know themselves? Do they really know God? Has the law transformed them from the inside? And this shows how the Lord deals with each of us according to our faith. Each and every one of us. On a spiritual level, we all suffer from various degrees of blindness. And the lesson the Lord might be on the spiritual level, that is, this enlightenment is a gradual process. There are different degrees to the spiritual life. And within those degrees, the Lord desires and requires our cooperation with grace. This is such a crucial point in our spiritual life, is that we cooperate with God's grace. That God gives us the freedom to cooperate, the freedom to choose Him, the freedom to make acts of faith, the freedom to make acts of hope, the freedom to choose Him in love. And we have to think that most likely when this man was completely healed, after Jesus laid his hands on his eyes, and remember he saw figures as of sticks. Then Jesus lays his hands a second time on the man's eyes and begs even more faith out of this man. He's testing his faith. He wants more faith. It's very similar to the woman at the well in Samaria, the Samaritan woman. How Jesus thirsts for this woman's faith. And he thirsts for our faith too. He thirsts that we might believe in him. And this man, it's very beautiful to think that most likely the first person he saw was the face of Jesus. When a baby is born, usually the first person the baby sees is the baby's mother. The baby instantaneously, obviously already recognizes who the mother is from being in that mother's womb for 9 months, from hearing the mother's voice, from hearing the father's voice. But this man hears Christ first in faith. Faith comes through hearing, St. Paul says. And then his faith in Jesus brings him gradual healing in physical sight. And he's able to lay his eyes on the face of Christ. Most likely, in life, most people are completely blind spiritually. And maybe some of us were there in our life. We had perfect sight, but spiritually, we're walking around in blindness. Totally ignorant, totally blind to spiritual realities, where our faith is weak. And our sight was once dim, and that we can scarcely make out the Lord working in our own lives or in the lives of other people or in the world. And how many of us at one point in our lives had very little awareness of the reality of the Lord's real presence in the Eucharist, or very little faith in the sacrament of penance, or different, we can go on and on and on, different spiritual realities that are just as real as our physical reality, but we can't see. But in this, the way the Lord deals with us most of the time, when we're going to regular Mass and we're going to confession most of all, most regularly, what seems to happen is those spiritual blinders start to come off, don't they? After going to regular confession for a while, we start to begin to see reality, even the world. We start to see ourselves in a totally different light. We start to see the world through not our eyes, but hopefully through the eyes of faith, through the vision that God has given us through faith. And we need to be vigilant in our life of faith. Most often, we are like the blind man being healed gradually again. It's the way the Lord deals with us, just like that blind man. Touching him once, he begins to see. He begins to see figures. Something is there. But very often, if we look back at our lives, most of us could probably say this, I think gradually we start to see more clearly. Even over the years, when one grows in one's faith, you start to see things differently. You start to see spiritual realities differently. You start to see the whole world differently. And why is this? Because faith can grow within us infinitely. It's a virtue that God gives us at baptism. It's a virtue that can grow infinitely because God is infinite. There's no limit to our growth in faith, that you get here to a certain level and then there's no more growth. We can grow in our virtue of faith as long as we have breath within us, as long as our heart is still beating. we can still grow in our faith. But unfortunately, we're the ones who pose obstacles, don't we? We're the ones who put up obstacles in our life of faith that we may grow in our vision of God. And our quote-unquote vision problem can only be corrected, first of all, if we detach from sin. And then most of all, living that life of virtue. Living the theological virtues, faith, hope, and charity, the moral virtues, prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And allowing the gifts of the Holy Spirit to operate within us. Wisdom, knowledge, understanding, counsel, fortitude, piety, and fear of the Lord. All of those gifts that God gives us. Correct our vision problem. And then really it's the Lord himself who does the surgery within us, you can say. He takes the spiritual cataracts off our eyes. Just like this man was healed in body, healed physically, we too can be healed in a spiritual sense. The Lord can do even deeper spiritual surgery and remove those cataracts, those obstacles that prevent us from seeing him more clearly.